Welcome to our discussion on norm reference and criterion reference spelling tests. We're going to look at the test of written spelling as an example of a norm reference test and the informal diagnostic spelling test as an example of a criterion reference test. So let's begin with the test of written spelling. Of course I can spell, I just can't spell conventionally. Spelling tests primarily look at the conventional spelling or the correct spelling and not developmental spelling. Test of written spelling, summary form. On the left-hand side, you check whether you're using list A or list B. So it has two forms or two different spelling lists that you can compare, for example, pre and post test. Below that are the scores that you can obtain: raw score, standard score, percentile, spelling, age, and grade equivalent. And below that is a profile sheet where you can profile differences across time. In the upper right-hand corner, where you record information about the child, age, gender, school, etc., and then you calculate the chronological age, which you're going to need for the norms. Below that, you can compare the test of written spelling to things like writing tests, reading tests, IQ tests. And finally, in the bottom right-hand corner, you're going to indicate anything like noise level interruptions, distractions, lighting, anything that could have affected the test performance. This is the student's sheet that they receive, so they're to write their name and the date. And then as you dictate the words, they write the words on the lines just like any spelling test you've taken in the past. The short line to the left is where you would score it as either correct for 1 point or 0 for incorrect spelling. The entry level is important, so please do not forget this. The idea is spelling and all that handwriting is fatiguing, so you do not want the child to write more than they need to write. If you look at the words, they're distributed from easy to more difficult. So they start out with yes, bad, let, us, and then it goes up to laborious, linguistic, opaque, and beyond. So you don't want to ask a sixth grader to start spelling words like yes, bad, let, and us, nor do you want a first grader to spell words like terrible and unify as their first words. So you have the child enter the test based on their grade level. So first through third grade would enter with word number 1, fourth through sixth grade would enter with word number 10, 7th through 9th grade would enter with word number 20, and grades 10 through 12 would enter with word number 30. So that is your entry level. Please do not ask your child to start with word number 1 if your child is older. Now we have to know when to stop. So you begin at your entry point and you test until 5 consecutive items are missed. If for some reason items are administered after that ceiling is reached, they do not count. So let's look at example number 1. We're looking for the point where the child misses 5 in a row. And it occurs right there. So that is your ceiling. Next, you're going to establish the basal. You had the child start the test at an entry point. That doesn't necessarily mean that that was the correct starting point for your child. So now we're going to find the highest point where there are 5 consecutive correct responses, or the basal, a place where they get 5 in a row correct. If there are 2 or more sequences of 5, the one closest to the ceiling is the true basal. All items below the true basal are counted correct, even if the child misses the item. Alright, so let's look at this in example A. So now look at the numbers and look for the place where you see 5 in a row correct. And it occurs between 13 and 17. So this is your basal. Now remember, it says all items below the true basal are counted correct even if the child missed them. So when we look at the items below the basal, there are 12 items. So far the child has is given those 12 items because those are the easier words. We're assuming that if he can spell 5 of the basal words, then he would have easily spelled words below the basal. Therefore, the child's score at that point is 17, and then we count the additional words the child got correct before the ceiling: 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, and so the child's score is 23. Let's look at example number B. First, we're going to look for the ceiling, or the place where they got 5 in a row correct. So look for that. And it occurs right there, 24 through 28. So 28 is your ceiling. Now we're going to look for the place where the child establishes a basal. So remember, they didn't start with item number 1. They started at some entry level. And we're going to look to see if they established a basal. So there's the first place where we had 4 correct, but we need 5 correct, so that's not a basal. Keep going down lower. We have another place where there's 4 correct, but not 5 correct, so we still don't have a basal. So you go lower. Now you are administering these items. So if you have not administered these lower level items, then you start backing up on the test. So if you started at item number 10 and you don't have a basal, then you went back to 9 and then 8 where there was another error. So you kept backing up: 7, 6, 5, 4. So we have 4 in a row again, but not a basal. So you keep going down: 3, 2, and 1. So you had to go all the way to the beginning of the test. So you did not establish a basal, which is just fine. You don't have to make mention of it in the report. Some people report a basal was not reached. That's an insignificant statement. Basically, all a basal is a point where you don't have to give the easier items because the child has shown you through their basal that they can spell the more difficult words. Okay, so now all you're going to count, you have to count each point that the child actually did receive before they reached a ceiling. So you would count all the number 1s that you had given credit for, and the child got a score of 18. Okay, third scenario over here on example C. So we're going to find a ceiling, 5 in a row correct. And there it is, 25 through 29. Well, the scorer hadn't noticed that they had hit a ceiling, so they kept testing. And so there's another 1 on item number 30 and another 1 on item number 32 before a second ceiling is reached. The true ceiling is that first ceiling, so they do not get any credit for item number 30 or 32, even though they spelled it correctly. So if you look at the rules on the ceiling, if for some reason items are administered after ceiling is obtained, they do not count. And now we're going to be looking for a basal. So we're going to start at the point of the ceiling and move backwards and see the first place where we have 5 in a row correct. Have you found it? Okay, and there it is. There's 5 in a row correct. So that is our basal. Now, according to the rules, okay, that is a true basal. It's 5 in a row correct, closest to the ceiling. So if you look right below that point, there's a 0. So the child had missed an error or missed the spelling of a word. And then there's another new basal below that. Well, the highest basal is the true basal. So even though you see a 0 on item number 15, the child gets credit for spelling that word correctly. So at this point, they've got 20 points. Make sure you understand that. Once you've got the true basal, which is the one closest to the ceiling, they get credit for all of the words below that point, even if the child had actually misspelled that word. So now we've got those 20 words plus 2 additional points before the ceiling, and so the score is all of those words plus the words is 22. All right. You can do an individual administration or a group administration. The examiner dictates the spelling words. The words are sequenced from easy to difficult. The examiner says the words in isolation, then says the word in a sentence, and then finally says the word in isolation again, which is pretty typical of every spelling test that you've ever taken. Here are Form A words. Yes. Yes, I am going to Marie's house today. Yes. So this is what you would be looking at. Bed. She slept on a bed. Bed. And the child would be writing their spelling or their response on that response form that we looked at earlier. If you want to administer the test to a group, you administer enough items to expect a ceiling and a basal for the group of children that you have. You need to spot check responses from the group to see if you should stop, if the group overall has received a ceiling. If individuals haven't achieved a basal or a ceiling, then you have to finish their testing individually. So once again, for grades 1 through 3, you would administer the first 20 words, 4 through 6, items 10 through 30, 7 through 9, items 20 through 50, and grades 10 through 12, items 30 through 50. And remember, for individuals, you might have to go back and establish a ceiling and a basal if they didn't achieve one within that 20-word frame. These are just examples of TWS words. See irregularly spelled words, words that have some morphemes on them, different kinds of vowel and syllable patterns, silent letters as in knife and new. Which means that you can go back and do an error analysis or look for patterns in the vowels and syllable structure that the child did not know. And that could give you some insight into what you might need to help the child with in spelling. Now, we are going to convert these raw scores, 22, 18, and 23, into standard scores because they're pretty meaningless on their own. Is 22 good for a first grader? Is it good for a seventh grader? So you have to calculate that chronological age, and then you have to find the appropriate age group in the norm table. So if your child is 6 years, 7 months, then you have to find the norm tables that are appropriate for a 6 or 7-month-old child. Likewise, if your child is 10 years, 2 months, then you have to use a different normative table that's appropriate for that age group. And then you're going to look up the quotient and percentile scores on these tables for your child. This is an example. This is an example of a normal curve that tells you how these tests compare to each other. So if the average performance on a z-score has a mean of 0, on a t-score 50, on a quotient score 100, on a scaled score 10, and you look at the standard deviation, the table will do this for you, but it tells you where along the normal curve your child's performance falls. So if your child is 6 years to 6 years 2 months, this is the column that you would use in the table to look for the standard score. So the average score is going to be right here. The average score of 100 is going to keep moving up in terms of the number of raw score points you need according to the child's age. So you have to make sure that you're under the right age category when you're reporting the standard score, which has a mean of 100 and a standard deviation of 15. This is the descriptive rating that you can receive. So you'll see that anything between 90 and 110. So 10 points on either side of that mean is average. 80 to 89 below average, 70 to 79 poor, 70 and below very poor, and vice versa for scores above the mean. This is another table. Once you have the standard score, no matter what age the child is, the standard score can be converted to a percentile score. So this one you don't need to convert it according to the child's age, because a standard is a standard. No matter what the age is, you already have it in a standard form. So now I can find that a score of 100, a standard score of 100, is at the 50th percentile, and so far and so forth for the other standard scores. Okay, the second test that we're going to look at, we are not going to get norms. There will be no normative table like we just looked at. We won't get a standard score and a percentile score. Instead, it's going to be a criterion reference test. So this is Kottmeyer's informal diagnostic spelling test. You administer this to a narrower age range. So this, the test of written spelling could be administered to anybody between 4 and adulthood, and this is going to be restricted to the grade levels that are the criteria. There are more words of the same pattern, so you'll see words with all 5 short vowel patterns, 2 words with each long vowel pattern, etc. It allows for better analysis of specific spelling patterns. It also can be administered individually or in a group. Okay, so this is the criterion for list 1. If the children score, your child that you give the test to scores below 15 correct, they're performing below a second grade level. 15 to 22, they're within a second grade level. 23 to 29, they're performing at a third grade level. If you get 29, then you should go on to list 2. So this is a slightly more difficult word list. And again, the criterion for third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, and sixth grade performance is provided. If you don't meet, even if you're a fourth grader and you don't meet the criteria for a third grader by performing below 9, then you should be given the first list. So these are the 2 lists. And they don't start easy and get progressively harder. They just start with relatively, common, easy words that have different patterns. So it's not that this is necessarily more difficult than this. So down and pretty might be equal in difficulty. They're just different word patterns. So this is list 1 and this is list 2. All of these should be mastered by a third grader, and all of these should be mastered by the end of grade school. Word patterns. Okay. This is the error analysis sheet. So the first 5 words had short vowels in them. So you score it as 1 or 0. You write the child's spelling so that you can see what they actually did put. And what they don't seem to be understanding, and then you score it as 1 or 0. So these are short vowels. These are the 2 vowels go walking rule. This is the silent E rule. This is OU and OW. The OO sound like oo and soon and good. This is when you have a Y at the end of a word. It makes the EEE sound. Very happy. Kids who don't know that rule will put an E on the end of the word, but that, of course, is a silent E. The kept and come, the hard and soft K spellings. These are the WHs, THs, SHs, CHs. These are words that have double final consonants. These are ER words, after, sister. These are the OI and A diphthongs. Consonant plus LE syllable shape, and irregular words that are common at that age. So those are the patterns that are assessed in this test. Similarly, in the list word 2, we're going to have things like OW and OU patterns, but in more complex words. So they're not only going to have that pattern, but they're also going to have consonant blends and digraphs in them. And then we have the WHs, CHs, and THs. We do more morphology kinds of things. So we add morphological markers to words. We understand as we move through, doubling vowels, etc., dropping silent E's. So these are more advanced patterns. Okay, so that's our discussion of spelling tests, and we'll see you in class.